Hi, how are you, Mr. Douglas Kenneth?
I'm very well. Hello from Paris.
Please say hello to Korean readers who have been waiting to meet you.
It is wonderful to be talking to everyone. Hello from Paris.
작가님 정말 많은 작품들을 집필을 하셨는데 처음에 어떤 계기로 작가의 꿈을 꾸게 되신 건지 참 궁금합니다. 그리고 작가로 살아가는 행복과 보람은 뭘까요? 제가 한국에서 정말 많은 작가님들을 만났을 때 정말 여러 가지 이유가 있지만 독자들의 무한한 사랑이 가장 큰 행복이다 이렇게 또 대답을 하곤 하시거든요.
I wanted to be a reader from the age of 9 onwards and a writer at the same time. I discovered books really when I was about 8, and I discovered writing when I was 9. And I've been writing ever since. I became successful as a writer actually in my early 40s, so almost 25 years ago. For me, the best thing about being a writer is the connection I have with my readers, but also the fact that I have a very independent life. I can travel where I want to. I can work when I want to. I just have to keep writing.
네, 정말 작가님 부럽습니다. 작가님 정말 많은 책이 있죠. 그 중에 제가 오늘 대표적인 몇 가지 작품을 골라와봤어요. 제가 다 너무나 사랑하는 책들이고요. 이 중에서 가장 먼저 이야기를 나눠보고 싶은 책은요, 바로 이 책입니다. 한국에서도 정말 큰 사랑을 받았죠. 빅픽처 이 책이고요. 이 책에서 주인공 벤이 나옵니다. 벤은 사진작가를 꿈꿨지만 지금은 변호사의 길을 걷고 있었어요. 그러다가 어느 날은 왜 내가 20대 중반에 그 기다림을 견디지 못하고 내 꿈을 포기했을까 후회하게 됩니다. 작가님도 아까 말씀하신 것처럼 아주 예전부터 글을 쓰셨고 약 20년간의 무명 생활이 있었던 걸로 알고 있는데 어떻게 그 긴 시간을 견딜 수 있었는지 포기하지 않았던 원동력은 뭔지가 참 궁금해요. 지금 또 기다림의 시간을 지나고 있는 많은 독자들이 있을 테니까요. 말씀 부탁드립니다.
I think the most important thing, and I say this, for example, my daughter, who is 25, Amelia, she's just written her first novel. And when she was blocked in the novel, she couldn't get through a certain part of it. She called me up. I mean, we speak 4 or 5 times a week. And she called me up and said, I don't think I can do this. And I told her something very hard. I said, look, I love you unconditionally. And I think you can do this. But here's the truth. If you don't finish it, I'll be upset, you'll be upset, but no one else will care. And I think that's very true. In a way, you actually have to work, whatever you do, for yourself. And you have to decide what kind of life you want, and are you willing basically to sort of, shall we say, have periods where it's not going well and you are having to do other things to keep going. Yes, I had 20 years where I was unknown, and I was watching people my own age doing very well and getting ahead, and I was wondering, will this happen for me? It eventually did when I was 41. And even since then, not every book has worked as well as certain other books. And you have to just deal with that. To me, the whole point of the exercise of writing is creating a body of work and just keeping going and learning all the time. So the important thing is, if you want to do something and you feel you have talent, you have to just keep doing it.
계속해라, 지속성을 가지고 꾸준히 해라, 이 말이 정말 정답인 것 같습니다, 작가님. 빅픽처에는 이런 이야기가 나옵니다. 415페이지 정도에 나왔던 이야기인 것 같아요. 미국에서는 고군분투하는 사람은 대부분 무명으로 남고 행운의 빛에 휩싸인 후에는 황금알을 낳는 거위가 된다. 이 말을 저는 유명세가 유명세를 불러온다 이렇게 이해를 했습니다. 실제로 그런 일이 많이 일어나고요. 작가님은 무명의 시절을 보내다가 언제부터 내가 유명해졌구나 그런 변화의 시기가 찾아왔다고 느끼셨나요?
I think it's very different for a writer because a writer is not a pop star. He or she, is not giving concerts. He's not appearing on a screen, 100 feet tall in front of people. It's not that kind of celebrity. And I'm always aware of something as well, which is success is a very fleeting condition. It can last for a little while. It can go away. It can come back again. There are a lot of writers who've written one book and that's it, or they've never been able to repeat it. I can think of several people like that. Big success and nothing ever happened again. The important thing for me is sustaining a career and also writing a different kind of book every time. I could have gone on and tried to write the big picture over and over and over again. That would have been one way of establishing a career. I tried to do something very different at the same time. In terms of celebrity, here in France, and I know in Korea, I'm stopped on the street in France. I was stopped by neighbors yesterday leaving my apartment. Mr. Kennedy, j'adore vos romans. I love your novels. And I'm always very kind and nice about it. But I don't take it that seriously. What I take seriously is writing and getting on to the next book. And also having that attachment that you get with readers when they say, this book meant a lot to me. Celebrity, I think, as someone once said, it's a mask that eats the face.
저도 제가 이제 방송국에서 일하는 아나운서다 보니까 가끔은 미디어에 노출이 되기도 하고 누군가 저를 알아보기도 하고 기사화가 돼서 가끔 기분 좋을 때도 있거든요. 근데 그게 정말 또 찰나의 순간이고 또 나의 일상은 지속이 되고 그 모습이 나의 진짜 모습이 아니라고 느낄 때도 있어요. 작가님의 말씀에 너무나 공감을 하고 유명사를 너무 진지하게 받아들이지 말 것, 그리고 나의 커리어 길을 계속 걸으면서 그 안에서 다양한 변화를 해볼 것, 참 중요한 말씀이었던 것 같습니다. 빅픽처가 정말 많은 사람들의 사랑을 받았던 이유, 꿈과 현실의 안정 사이에서 누구나 흔들리고 고민하기 때문이 아닐까 합니다. 이런 말이 나오죠. 누구나 인생의 비상을 갈망하지만 스스로 가족이라는 덫에 깊이 파묻고 산다. 정말 그렇습니다. 나의 꿈도 있지만 내가 지켜야 할 가족도 있고요. 이 안에서 고민을 하는 거죠. 그런데 또 이렇게 말해요. 그건 다른 누구의 탓도 아니야. 그렇게 순전히 그렇게 선택한 너의 선택이고 너의 탓이야. 이게 참 한국말로 뼈아픈 말이라고 저는 생각을 했는데요. 그럼 궁금한 게 나중에 30대가 되고 40대가 되고 더 나이가 들었어요. 뒤늦게 후회할 수 있잖아요. 그럴 때 어떻게 해야 될까요? 지금이라도 나의 모든 안정을 버리고 내 꿈을 위해 다시 뛰어 들어가야 하는지 작가님 어떻게 해야 되나요?
I'm at a point now, I'm in my 60s, and I have friends who are dying regularly. And I've lost 3 friends from school in the last 2 years. It's very unsettling, but it's also life. My moment will come as well. And I was in a very long marriage from the age of really 28 until I was 53 years old. So very, very long time. And we had 2 children. And I left it because I was unhappy. I paid a price, of course, especially a financial price, but it was necessary. I think one of the saddest things in life is if you wake up and you think, I shouldn't have done this, but it's almost too late. I have a very, very good friend who was at university with me in the States, who was a brilliant composer, and he wrote musical theater, and he was very talented. But his father convinced him to be a lawyer, to do something serious. He has been a very successful lawyer, very successful. He's in a marriage which I don't think is very happy, although he doesn't talk about it. And he's my age now, and he suffered from terrible depression. And he said to me once, about 10 years ago, we were having a drink. I was back in the States, and he said, "You took the risk." And I said to him, "You still could." He said, "No, it's too late." You see, that interests me. The very fact that basically people, they put up their own blockades, or they try to sort of do what their parents tell them to do. And I think that's very bad. I remember telling my daughter a couple of years ago, I said, "The way you will rebel against me is you will marry an accountant." And she laughed. She's very arty. But my point was, my father always said to me, "You will never be a writer. You'll never do it. You should be a lawyer." That was the beginning of the big picture for me. That's when I started thinking about the book. And the fact that, for a long time I wasn't successful. I never asked him for a penny. But I just kept writing because I was very determined. I'm still very determined. I think that's it. You owe yourself an interesting life, whatever that means.
네. 머리로는 우리가 잘 아는데 참 실제로는 선택하기 어려운 거죠. 하지만 이 작가님의 말을 듣고 또 이 책을 읽고 우리 독자분들도 꼭 용기를 가져서 나의 흥미로운 삶을 우리 모두 살아갔으면 좋겠습니다. 저도 꼭 그렇게 앞으로 살아갈게요, 작가님. 감사합니다. 이 책에서 또 나오는 것처럼 우리가 또 많이 고민하는 게 예술과 안정, 이 사이에서 갈등이 아닐까 해요. 근데 작가님은 언뜻 보기에 둘 다 가지신 것 같아요. 성공한 작가고 돈도 벌었겠죠? 뭔가 안정적인 삶도 영위하실 것 같고 다 충족하고 살아갈 거라고 생각을 하는데 작가님도 여전히 이 사이에서 흔들리는 게 있는지 예술가로서의 감도 잃지 않으면서 뭔가 또 안정적인 안락함도 누리고 싶은 두 가지 마음에서 어떻게 살아가시나요?
I have lots of concerns. Show me somebody who doesn't have worries. Everyone is worried in one way or the other. My career has been very up and down. There have been moments where my books haven't sold at all in America or elsewhere, and then that has come back. There have been books that have been bigger successes than others. I've had difficulties with certain publishers, never my Korean, but I had a very difficult editor for a while in England. She's gone now, and that was very difficult. In my personal life, I've been divorced twice. That's not a very pleasant experience both times around, although it was me who eventually did the leaving in both cases. At the same time, this is what I'm saying is it's part of an interesting life. You're not going to have everything go your way. You're not going to suddenly get success and keep it. You have to work at it. And sometimes what you're doing is not going to be embraced by, readers the same way an earlier book is. You have to accept that. If you can try to go back to the earlier success and say, oh, I'll do this again. But I actually think that's a bad idea. I'm actually not a very unhappy man. In fact, I would think myself a relatively happy man. I'm single. I'm not short of company when I want it. I've just traveled for a few weeks in Spain. I'm off to Italy in a week. I'm writing all the time. I have girlfriends. I'm not an unhappy person. At the same time, is it a conventional life? Probably not, but I never wanted that. I am very close to my two children. Max is 28, almost 29. My daughter Amelia is 25. That's been, I think, one of the greatest discoveries of my life was becoming a parent and actually liking it. And also not wanting to make the same mistakes my parents made and give my children a very different kind of life. Show me a life where there hasn't been a degree of disappointment. I think everyone has disappointment. Show me a life where there hasn't been a degree of things not going your way, and show me a life where there hasn't been tragedy as well. It's part of the deal. I think we lie to ourselves if we say, everything can go well. It won't. And I think, if you accept that, that's fine, and also the perfect family is a lie. It really is. I think one of the great films of the last 5 years is that brilliant Korean film Parasite. And Parasite shows these two families. The poor family are very connected. They're complicit. The rich family are completely alienated from each other. You can have everything and you can have nothing at the same time.
기생충을 또 감명 깊게 보셨다니까 우리 본 감독님이 참 기뻐하지 않을까 하고요. 작가님 말씀 들으면서 그런 생각을 했어요. 우리가 누군가의 삶을 볼 때 그 삶의 화려한 모습, 성공은 잘 주목하지만 그 뒤에 힘듦은 잘 보지 않잖아요. 누구나 그런 고민과 또 힘든 부분이 있고 실망하게 되는 순간이 있고 그럼에도 또 각자의 행복을 찾아가는 게 참 중요한 게 아닌가 네, 그런 생각을 했습니다. 말씀 감사합니다. 이번에는 제가 참 궁금한 질문입니다. 인간관계에 대한 저도 올해 여러 가지 고민을 또 많이 했었거든요. 왜 우리가 살다 보면 믿었던 사람에게 배신을 당하기도 하고요. 또 내가 정말 잘 안다고 생각했던 사람인데 또 의외의 모습에 상처를 받기도 합니다. 왜냐하면 인간은 참 다면적이고 모순적인 행동을 하잖아요. 이럴 때 상처를 받게 되죠. 그러면서 타인에 대한 마음을 굳게 닫기도 하는데 어떻게 해야 될까요? 상처받지 않기 위해서 어떻게 상대와의 관계를 유지해야 하는지, 작가님은 어떻게 그런 관계들을 만들어 나가시는지 궁금합니다.
It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. If you, frankly, if you're going to get involved with someone, there's the potential for getting hurt. You know, it's. Yeah, I mean, look, you're in a car, all right, and you're driving. There's a potential for an accident. If you get into bed with somebody and you form a relationship with somebody and you get involved, the fact of the matter is, and I think this is very important, people change and situations change. You know, I have friends who tell me about their marriages and they haven't had sex for 10 years. These are people in their 50s and their 60s, and sometimes younger. And I go, oh my God, how do you deal with that? I could not imagine that. But people do, and then other people walk away. The fact of the matter is, if you become friends with somebody and you trust somebody, there is the chance that that person could betray you or not. It can happen. I think everyone has suffered this, and maybe we've all in a different way betrayed people. I mean, you know, I'm sure, you know, people would think, I mean, if you've been involved with somebody and you've cut them loose and you've said, I don't want this anymore, people will feel betrayed by that. They'll feel hurt. This is part of the game and part of the deal. There's no way around this. Everyone has this idea of a fairy tale that, you know, I'm going to meet someone, I'm going to feel complete. This person will give me everything I want. I will hopefully be everything to that person, and we will live very well until death takes us away. It's a very nice idea. It doesn't really work that way. I tend to look at life like a novelist. I think there are chapters. And I think, you know, there are people who you get involved with intimately, and that can last a very short time. It can last a night. It can last months. It could last maybe a few years. I was in a very long first marriage. We were together 25 years. It did not end well. At the same time, we have two wonderful children, and there were moments of happiness together, but it wasn't all the time, and it fell apart in the end. And it was the right decision. It was not an easy decision, but it was the right decision. I fell in love with somebody a second time. We got married. It lasted 5 years. I left eventually. I'm not going to get into why, because that's private. But I don't regret it. It was, you know, I was very much in love at the time, as she was. It did not last. This is just how it is. I think you just have to accept that you are going to disappoint people and people are going to disappoint you.
네, 정말 제가 불가능한 꿈을 꿨었구나라는 거를 작가님 말을 들으면서 완전히 깨달았어요. 그리고 오히려 상처를 받을 가능성을 인정하니까 마음이 편안해집니다. 지금 작가님의 그 말씀이 아주 수많은 독자들의 마음에 확 와닿았을 거라고 저는 생각을 해요. 네, 그런데 이 작가라는 직업은 작가님이 기본적으로 자신을 많이 드러낼 수밖에 없는 직업이라고 저는 생각을 합니다. 작가님 책을 읽으면서도요, 좀 반복적으로 나오는 이야기도 있고요. 작가님의 이야기가 많이 담겨 있는 것 같다는 인상을 받았거든요. 예를 들어 뭐 부모의 이야기, 가족의 이야기, 아이에 대한 이야기, 여러 선택에 대한 이야기, 여러 가지가 나오는데 작가님의 유년 생활이나 여러 인생의 경험들을 책에 많이 녹이시나요?
All the time. The difference, though, is I've never taken something directly from my life and written it as my life, as a character named Douglas Kennedy, or directly my parents. I've never written about my two ex-wives. I've done it in a very indirect way. I think that's better. I think if you try to take your whole life and throw it out like that, you're not going to actually get to any sense of truth. you're probably trying to settle scores and get even, which is a terrible thing to do. But the fact of the matter is, and I've always said this, all writing is on a certain level autobiographical, even if it's not your story, because you're bringing everything that you've experienced into the book. You know, I mean, when I was writing Isabel in the Afternoon, everyone asked me, "Who's Isabel? Is there this woman with whom you had a 30-year affair?" And I went, "None of your business," because I don't talk about my private life that way. But there have been several Isabels, put it that way. I've been, involved in situations like that with a married person. It's France. That happens all the time. It happens everywhere else too. But is it my story? No, not at all. And the narrator, Sam, is not me. But there also is a lot of me in Sam, even though it's not him. So if you see what I mean, I change all the details and I write something fictional. But because I'm writing it, of course, I bring everything that I lived and observed, and the stories I've heard as well. A girlfriend once said to me, "You ask a lot of questions." And I said, "Yes, well, I'm interested, and also it's all material." And I feel that about my own life. It's all material. I said that recently to my daughter when she was going through a bad period. I said, "I know it's hard, but use it. Use it in a different way, but you can." That's the beauty about being a writer. It's all material.
네, 너무 좋은 답변이었고요. 빅픽처는 이쯤에서 또 마무리하고요. 제가 다음은 너무나 사랑하는 책입니다. 오후의 이자벨 책에 관한 또 질문을 드려볼게요. 작가님, 저는 책을 너무너무 재밌게 읽었고 정말 딱 펴자마자 그냥 빠져들어서 읽었습니다. 그리고 마지막 딱 책을 덮을 때는 눈물을 제가 거의 흘리고 있더라고요. 그 질문을 많이 들으신다고 했는데 작가님 이자벨이 굉장히 저는 궁금하다 이런 생각을 했고 이런 이야기가 나오죠. 누구에게나 모든 것이 무한하고 가능한 것 같은 시절, 오후에 이자벨이 있다라고 하는데 그런 열정의 순간, 그건 뭐 청년에게만 찾아오는 건 아니겠죠. 작가님에게 오후의 이자벨은 어떤 순간이었나요?
Oh, there have been many Isabels in the afternoon. I'm not just talking about personally, but also just as well in terms of, those moments where you find actually happiness with somebody, and it might just be temporary. I remember, once after my divorce, meeting this journalist who I knew was crazy in France, and we had dinner together and ended up in her apartment, and I woke up at about 4 a.m. next to her in bed. And she was up early. She was an insomniac. She couldn't sleep, and she was sitting at her desk with a cigarette, naked, writing. And I was just looking at this small little apartment under a rooftop in Paris, and thinking to myself, "Isn't life wonderful?" And I think one of the things about Isabel, why I wrote it, is actually the capacity for passion, I hope, goes on all life. I know people, sometimes say, "Oh, I've stopped that now. I'm not interested anymore." I find that terrible. I think you have to be passionate your entire life. But that's me personally. And I like that idea. And I don't think that has to stop. But at the same time, the other thing about the book is it asks a difficult question, and I don't provide an answer. And the question is this: can passion actually be sustained better if it's not day in, day out? The beauty about Isabel and Sam is the fact that they don't see each other all the time. They're not living a domestic life. There were opportunities when that could have happened, and it would have changed. But also the fact that you can have this very profound, intimate connection with somebody, a passionate connection with somebody, where it's not the person you're living with or building a life with. And yet, in some ways, it might be more profound because it's exactly not that. And I've known that. I've known that in my life. And it's rather wonderful. But it's not very conventional. And yet I think it's something that a lot of people dream of. And, I guess the other big question which I ask in the book is, what is fidelity? Is fidelity about only making love with one person for the rest of your life? Is there an emotional fidelity? The French, I think, still feel that, a room has many compartments, and you might create a family with somebody, and you might then start seeing someone else, what they call a jardin secret, a secret garden, where you see this person from time to time, and that also provides a certain passion and a certain adventure, and maybe it keeps you in the relationship. But for other people, that is horrible. That's complete infidelity. Is fidelity ownership? Is fidelity fear? Is fidelity, frankly, a way of controlling somebody else? I'm not going to provide any answers to those questions whatsoever. I just like posing them.
제가 작가님의 오후의 이자벨 책을 사랑하는 이유입니다. 정말 어려운 질문이기도 하죠. 하지만 독자마다 이 책을 읽으면서 계속 그 사이에서 나의 답은 뭘까라고 많이 생각했을 것 같아요. 말씀하신 것처럼 또 오후의 이자벨은 그런 질문을 던집니다. 우린 또 고민하죠. 사랑과 안정. 어떤 걸 선택해야 될까? 내가 열정을 선택했을 때 이게 얼마나 또 지속이 될까에 대한 의심을 끊임없이 본인이 합니다. 왜 우리가 어릴 때는 순수한 열정, 순수한 사랑을 쫓는 것 같다가 나이가 들면서 안정적인 선택을 하게 되는 또 경향이 있다고 말을 하잖아요. 왜 그럴까요? 우리가 정말 그 자유를 불안하게 느끼기 때문일까요? 혹은 원하는 걸 내가 막상 이뤄도 또 그게 변할 거라는 걸 알기 때문일까요? 왜 그럴까요?
There is a Danish philosopher named Søren Kierkegaard, very famous, who said, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. And I think you raise a very, very important point, which is freedom makes people very anxious. They really do. I think my friends will look at me and they'll say, you're in your 60s now. You seem to be very independent. You should really sort of find someone and be with that someone all the time. And I'm going, well, that's one way of doing it. It's not my way. And I also did that for a while. And it worked for a while, and then it didn't. I think, I frankly think as you get older, stability might be less important. I think certainly we're all programmed in a way to think, we want to, meet someone. We want to build a life with someone. We want to have someone there to make us less afraid in the dark, as I once said it, I think in Isabel, that's also that feeling of someone we're sharing our lives with. And then, also routine sets in. Sometimes resentment sets in. Sometimes boredom sets in. I know that very much. But everyone desperately chases this. And yet, if you look at the rate of divorce, it's now over 50%, sometimes 55, 60% in most Western countries. Most countries worldwide, most developed countries, I think I should say. And frankly, why is that? Because also it doesn't always work. My parents grew up in the 1930s and were married in the early 50s. They should have gotten a divorce. They didn't. My father was very Catholic, but he couldn't stand my mother, and my mother was not happy. But they stayed together until my father died. Was that a good solution? I don't think so. It gave me a lot of material. It wasn't very happy growing up in it, but it was something I was observing from a very early age. My parents weren't happy together. Why is that? It gave me a subject that I keep coming back to in my books. And as I said before, I think you have to also understand in life that it is a chapter. And a chapter might last for your entire life. It might be like almost like a novel. And it also might be short, and it might go wrong, and you might get hurt. But I think that's also interesting in itself. I think we have to sort of stop worrying. I think people worry about freedom because they think if I am free, I'll be all alone. I will die by myself. That's not true. If you want to meet somebody, you probably can. I've never used an online dating site. I know a lot of friends who do. And frankly, I think people are always looking for other people. The fact is, and I think this is a very important point, and I said this once to both my children, I said, knowing what you want, that's a very hard question. That's a very, very hard question because it will change. Knowing what you don't want, that's essential.
너무 좋은 말씀입니다, 작가님. 그러니까요. 근데 저는 정말 궁금해요. 그러니까 이혼을 하는 게 더 나을 것 같은 부부가 계속 살아가기도 하고, 또 갈팡질팡하기도 하죠. 결혼을 해야 되나 말아야 되나. 내가 진짜 원하는 게 뭘까? 그게 어렵다고 말씀하셨잖아요. 진짜 어렵습니다. 그렇다면 작가님이 생각하는 결혼의 이유. 작가님 왜 결혼하셨나요? 결혼의 이유가 뭔지 궁금하고요. 결혼 이후에도 사랑을 유지하는 게 가능하다고 믿으시는지, 그러기 위해서는 어떤 노력들이 필요하다고 생각을 하시나요?
I think I got married the first time because it was the right moment. I think if I had thought about it at length, and I think it would have been the same for my then wife, we weren't really right for each other, but we did spend 25 years together, and we did have two fantastic children, and there were moments that were very good. So we weren't not exactly wrong for each other, but I see now that probably it was not the smartest decision either of us made, and yet it wasn't a terrible one. And I think it got to a point where basically I knew I was unhappy, and I'm not going to go into why, and it was time to go. There was a moment where I just realized one day, it's over. That was a very hard moment, but I just realized I can't go back. The second time, I was very much in love with somebody, and she was with me as well. But there were problems. Again, I'm not going to get into it. And I was very, very sad when it ended, and yet I thought it was necessary. Why do people get married? I think the second time around, it was stupid of me to get married, because we were both people with children, and we didn't need to get married, and yet there was something quite symbolic about it, which I liked. And I thought this was going to be the person with whom I was going to spend the rest of my life. And I felt very strongly about that, and I thought I was lucky. And then I thought I wasn't so lucky when other things started happening. But, again, I'm not against marriage. What I will say, having been through 2 divorces, it's damn expensive. And it also is not just a financial expenditure, it's the emotional and psychological pain that you go through when something ends. That's very hard. At the same time, I think, why I did it the second time, I think it was an act of optimism. And there's nothing wrong with optimism. I think the first time around, again, I was in my late 20s, just turning 30. I had been in and out of relationships. Grace, that was her name, was beautiful, and she was a great deal of fun and vivacious, and it just seemed like the right moment. And then, 6 years later, we had a child, and then another child. I think that's another reason why people get married, to have children, to start a family, to use that expression. We're all by and large programmed to do this. But again, it's a risk, and it might not work out. And honestly, that's okay. As painful as it might be, that's okay. I've said this to friends who've gone through it recently. People in their mid-60s, and I've just said, there is somebody else if you want to find that person. And also, there is freedom in being on your own as well, which is not something to look the other way against. Freedom is actually a very interesting thing, but it's very hard for most people to accept that.
네, 아직 제가 미혼인데 미혼으로서 참 많은 도움이 되는 답변이었습니다. 우리가 결혼해서조차 다 너무 완벽하려고 했구나 하는 생각을 작가님 말씀을 들으면서 이해하게 됐고요. 슬프고 힘든 순간이 찾아올 수도 있지만 그 챕터조차도 모든 행복과 의미가 있다, 이렇게 받아들였습니다. 그리고 작가님 작품을 보면요, 능력 있는 여성인데 결혼을 하고 아이를 낳으면서 자신의 커리어나 꿈을 포기하는 캐릭터가 여러 번 반복적으로 나옵니다. 여성들이 경험할 수 있는 여러 제약이나 현실에 대해서 평소에 작가님 많이 관심을 갖고 계시는구나 느꼈거든요. 어떠신가요?
Well, very happily. My mother was a very unhappy woman. She was very educated. She went to university. I think she always had problems with mental stability, and she was in and out of jobs when she was younger. And then she met my father. She got married, and she got pregnant, and I arrived when she was 26 years old. And there were 2 more sons after that. And she tried to work again as a real estate agent in her 50s. But I saw from a very young age, and also this was the post-war period in America, the 1950s and the 60s, when 2 things were happening. One, women very much were told, you know, you're there to essentially be the homemaker, to be the mother, and you give up your career when you have children. And then there was the sexual revolution and feminism, where that was being questioned very, very heavily. I have a lot of women friends who were at university with me, people my age, my generation now. A lot of them gave up their careers and became housewives and mothers. I know others who did both, and I know certain women who stayed single. And, you know, I've never been with a woman who I tried to turn into a housewife. On the contrary, I think I would always run away from someone like that, because it probably reminded me of my mother, and she and I did not have the easiest of relationships. I have a daughter who's 25 and is very feminist and very independent. I think, you know, and fundamentally, I never see her going down that path. The fact is, women are still a minority in terms of just career advancement, and this is true everywhere. The United States still hasn't been able to elect a woman president. I think there is still a tremendous amount of misogyny in the world, and traditionally women are still less paid, less well paid than men. That is wrong. That is absolutely wrong. I think in all my books, you see women often going through these very large questions of, can I be a mother and a professional woman at the same time? Can I actually give up my independence for the family? Must I give up my career for my family? These are questions that are still being asked and played out today. And because I grew up in a very unhappy domestic situation, all the women in my life have been professionals, and I think will continue to be so. I'm not against anyone's thinking, I want to just be at home with my children, and I just want to be a housewife. That's a choice. But also, it's like a lot of choices in life, there also has to be the choice to not do that and not be punished for that. And I think that's what feminism was about, really, was the fact that also women have the right to have a career and and be a mother or not be a mother. Just as I am very passionate about the subject of choice when it comes to abortion. And the novel I just finished, which just came out in English, is all about abortion. And, you know, abortion is not a pleasant business by any stretch of the imagination, but the choice to be able to have an abortion, that is a woman's choice, and it has to be. A woman has the right to basically decide what she does with her body and what she does with her life.
네. 그렇죠. 정말 겉으로는 그냥 언뜻 봤을 때는 모든 평등이 찾아온 것 같습니다. 하지만 여전히 여성이 뭔가를 선택할 때 여러 제약이 따르는 우리가 세상에 살아가고 있고요. 어떤 선택이든 옳다 그르다가 아니라 정말 주체적으로 선택할 수 있는 그런 날이 더 와야 된다. 이런 말씀이었던 것 같아요. 많은 분들에게 또 용기를 주셨습니다. 이제 다음 책인데요. 또 제가 정말 사랑하는 책입니다. 바로 이 오로르 시리즈예요, 작가님. 제가 참 많이 또 고민했던 바가 이 책에 답이 들어 있어서 정말 좋았고요. 어떻게 이렇게 어른과 또 아이 모두 읽을 수 있는 동화책이라고 해야 될까요? 이런 오로르 시리즈를 집필하게 되셨는지 궁금하네요.
Several things. I've been thinking about a children's book for a long time. And I'd also been thinking about treating autism in a very different way because my son Max is on the autistic spectrum, and he's a remarkable young man. He is now a photographer living in New York City. He's going back to London soon, I think, because that's where he was raised and he wants to go back there. But he now has a master's from the University of London. And this was a young man who, at the age of 5, I was told by experts, had no hope of an independent future, and yet he's a completely independent person. But I didn't want to write a book about Max. I didn't want to write a book about autism. I wanted to write, as you say, a book that also can be read by adults and children at the same time. And what I wanted to really write a book about was difference. When I was in school, I was bullied terribly. I even wrote an essay about this and named the guy who did this 40 years later, and how horrible he'd been to me. And I remember I wasn't someone who at the time was sporty. I read a lot. I was raised with, I was born with very bad knees, and my feet were flat, so I walked in a very strange way. And I was teased all the time, and the situation wasn't very happy at home, so it was difficult. But I actually discovered things that I was good at, like writing and also making up stories. I was very good at, frankly, going to movies. And I spent a lot of my adolescence going to interesting movies and to museums and to concerts. Culture became my great life. I mention all that because when I was writing Aurora, I kept thinking, there is nothing wrong with being different. In fact, it's better to be different. One of the hardest things in school, and I saw my 2 children go through this, is that if you are different, you're picked upon. The people who are popular, who have the gang of friends, and it's true everywhere, they're always the ones who seem to sort of be picking on you as well. So I wanted to write a book about difference and to tell children it's all right to be different. And I also wanted to write a book where the family has broken up. The parents are divorced. The mother has moved out to the suburbs because it's cheaper there. Aurora has a sister who's an adolescent and is having all the usual adolescent problems and resents having a sister who is autistic and seems to be getting everybody's attention. I wanted to tell children as well, these things happen in life. Parents divorce, siblings don't get along, bullies operate at school and make your life hell. But it's okay. You can be different. And actually being different is the way to get through all this.
맞습니다. 정말 저는 다른 거는 멋진 거라고 생각을 해요. 용기 있는 거고요. 또 정말 그 자신만의 그 색깔이 가지고 있는 거잖아요. 그런데 주변에서 흔히 나의 어떤 다른 선택, 나만의 어떤 삶을 살아가는 것에 대해서 여러 평가와 또 비난이 따르기도 합니다. 그런 것에 위축되기도 하고요. 그럴 때 그런 평가에 위축되거나 고민하지 않으려면 어떻게 해야 될까요, 작가님?
It depends on what kind of judgment. There's positive judgment. I mean, I can remember, teachers of mine in school saying, this is a good essay, but it's not a brilliant essay, or this is not a good essay, and you need to rewrite it and rethink it. That's positive judgment. Then there are people who call you names. and who make criticisms of you and do so harshly, and sometimes say lousy things to you. And I've had members of my family do that. What I think is very important, and I say this to my children, and I think this comes out in both of the Aurora books as well. Basically, in my experience, people who bully other people are usually being bullied at home, and arrogance and unpleasantness usually hides a tremendous amount of personal doubt. And so if someone is unpleasant to you, I remember going to a dinner here in Paris some years ago with a very famous actor and director who's notoriously difficult. And he's an arrogant little man. And, you know, he was there with his girlfriend, who was much younger, and he was touching her in a very inappropriate way at dinner. I was watching this. And then he turned to me and said, "I've never read your books, but I hear they're trash." Okay. And I just said to my host something else. I actually ignored it. I didn't give him oxygen. I think that's very important to remember this when someone is doing something unpleasant to you, saying something unpleasant to you. By and large, they are actually talking about their own fear. And if you give oxygen to it, they're going to love it and they're going to continue. The best thing you can do is walk away and actually just think to yourself, what a sad person.
근데 요즘엔 이런 괴롭힘이라고 해야 될까요? 이런 게 SNS 상에서 더 격렬하게 많이 일어나는 것 같아요. 자신을 드러내지 않고 누군가를 오락처럼 비난하기도 하고, 저는 이런 것에 많은 피로함을 또 느끼기도 하는데, 그걸 또 보면서 어떻게 이런 세상에서 살아가야 될지, 어떤 마음으로 좀 지나가야 될까요?
I mean, bullying on social media is terrible, and there's a lot of it going on, especially among younger people. And it's awful. And I use that as well in Aurora. Someone is bullied online, and it's a very, very painful situation. I think basically you actually have to use that key that says delete, and you need to block that person, and you also need to tell your parents or someone in authority if that's happening. And if you're older, basically, you know, again, I think what bullies want is they want to make sure that you feel they're hurting you, which they probably are. And that's understandable. I mean, you know, it's very bad to be shamed by somebody in that way. But you also have to realize their behavior is pathetic. And frankly, it's a terrible thing to do. And, you know, there's a very interesting statement. It's a Buddhist idea, which I like very much. You know, if someone bullies somebody and someone shames somebody, it's a form of vengeance. And according to the Buddhist idea, vengeance is where you drink poison, thinking the other person will die. Remember, the person who's doing the bullying is actually poisoning themselves. And just delete them, cut them off, and try to ignore it. And also, if necessary, get professional help.
작가님 정말 또 명쾌한 대답이었습니다. 작가님의 오늘 정말 대화가 저에게도 많은 지혜를 줬고요. 아마 우리 독자분들도 똑같은 마음을 지금 느끼고 있을 것 같아요. 작가님은 이렇게 누군가에게 위안과 지혜를 주지만 작가님은 정작 또 힘든 순간이 있고 슬픈 감정이 밀려올 때가 있잖아요. 이럴 때는 어떻게 그 슬픔을 이겨내시나요?
I write the next sentence. I write the next sentence. I mean, I basically tell myself this is not a permanent situation. I do a lot of things. I go to the gym. I work out every day. I find physical exercise is very good. I will take a walk if need be. I will go to a movie. I go to a lot of movies. I will go to an interesting concert. I will read something. I will also tell myself this is not a permanent situation. But, you know, Sadness is unfortunately part of life. And there are things that are going to happen to you which are going to be sad, and they will continue to, I was talking to a good friend of mine. He's a musician, and he's had a degree of success in his life, and it's been difficult recently for him, especially during COVID, because he can't do concerts. And, I was just saying, this is not a permanent state of affairs. You know this. You've lived a long enough life to know this. You have to just say to yourself, okay, this is a bad moment. I'm not happy. That doesn't mean I'm wrong not to feel happy, or I should be happy. Okay, I'm not happy. What can I do to at least mitigate the unhappiness of the moment? And as I say, I will go to the gym and work out for an hour and a half. What I won't do is drink a bottle of whiskey. Okay, that's a way of making yourself more unhappy. I won't take pills to make myself feel better, but some people need to do that, and that's understandable if you do it with a doctor. I think, we all have to negotiate sadness. The way I do it is to keep my mind active, and also to tell myself this isn't permanent. But it's not easy.
네. 슬픔은 자연스러운 거고, 물론 그걸 극복하는 게 좀 쉽진 않지만 각자의 방식대로 다 그렇게 지금 그 순간을 슬기롭게 잘 극복하는 게 중요하다, 이런 말씀을 하신 것 같습니다. 작가님, 꼭 드리고 싶었던 질문이 있어요. 요즘에 정말 책을 사랑하는 분들은 너무 책을 사랑하지만 또 예전만큼 또 책을 읽지 않는 분들도 그만큼 늘었습니다. 왜냐하면 너무 재밌는 게 많잖아요. 저도 제가 딱 한 권이지만 작년에 책을 출간을 했고 이 출판 시장의 흐름을 유심히 지켜보고 있는데, 작가님은 이에 대한 어떤 생각을 하시나요? 책을 읽지 않는 시대에 대해서.
I'm going to show you my room here in Paris. Okay, hang on for a moment. I'm just going to turn this around for a moment, and you can see all the books. Okay, all the books, and pictures of my children and some CDs, but all the books. And there is here I'm back again. There's another room full of books. In Maine, my house in America, I have 5,000 books. Books are what I buy a lot of. I probably buy too many books, but I love books. I discovered when I was 8 years old that with a book I could travel. It was not a happy situation at home. We also didn't have a lot of money, so we weren't traveling, but I could explore the world with a book. I think I've just been in Spain, and I read 7 books in 2 weeks. I read all the time. The biggest challenge we have today in the world is to get people away from this, which is the mobile phone, the screen, because everyone's looking at it all the time. All the time. We all have it. I mean, and we can't get away from it. And you see couples in restaurants, I was seeing this in Spain all the time, young couples, and they're sitting there and looking at their mobile phones, and they're not talking with each other. And you also see children doing this constantly, whereas children should have a book to read, or they should be coloring, drawing, whatever. This is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that education has now. How do you create a new generation of readers when, frankly, reading has become a minority event, and it shouldn't be? Books are also the way you learn to think. Books are the way you learn to analyze. And it's interesting. I mean, I went to a very good school in New York, and we were taught how to read critically and analytically. And I hired a friend of mine who is a professor at the University of London to give tutorials to my son Max, to basically teach him how to read critically and think properly. And my daughter had that as well at university. They're both readers, but they're my children. Reading is freedom.
정말 저도 하루에 기본 스크린 타임이 10시간이 넘습니다. 정말 이 모바일 사용을 줄여야겠다. 정말 많이 생각을 하고 있고요. 네. 정말 너무 끝내기 아쉬운데요, 작가님. 벌써 이제 마칠 시간이 다 돼가지고 마지막 질문을 드리려고 합니다. 오늘 작가님 뵈어서 너무너무 반가웠고요. 영광이었고요. 지금 우리가 모두 힘든 이 코로나 시대를 지나고 있잖아요. 나의 의지와 상관없이 외부에 여러 변수가 있고 흔들리기 쉬운 지금 시기를 우리가 모두 지나고 있습니다. 작가님이 인생에서 흔들리지 않는 어떤 인생관, 가치관 이런 게 궁금하고요. 또 마지막으로 한국의 독자분들에게 한 말씀도 부탁드립니다.
With pleasure. To begin with, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. And it's been an extremely interesting and intelligent interview. And I'm also incredibly impressed with my translator because my answers are very long and, very well done. And it's also been a very, very perceptive interview. We're living through, and it's still going on, a period that is absolutely extraordinary, where we've been cut off from each other, where a lot of our liberty, the ability to get on a plane and go somewhere, has changed, and where we've been closed off from society as a whole, it's starting to open up again. I think more than anything, we're also at a period where around the world there is the threat of the totalitarian. We had this in America with Trump. You see it in many countries. In Korea, you live right next to probably the most totalitarian regime in the world, in the north. And frankly, I think what is most important to remember is society is important. How we treat each other is important. Education is crucial. And frankly, we really need to honestly remember that culture is also crucial to society. It's not all about buying things. It's not all about essentially chasing after this fashion. It's also about enriching ourselves, and we can do that through culture. Going to an interesting movie, hearing an interesting concert. You have a great tradition of classical music in Korea. You have a lot of great musicians there. Reading, thinking. These are important things, and we must actually preserve them, because if we don't, democracy will die. And I am very, very grateful for my enormous readership in Korea, and I've been twice, and I hope to come back very soon.
Yeah. 작가님 정말 감사합니다. 정말 너무너무 즐거운 시간이었고요. 지금 파리에 계시나요? 어디에 계시나요?
I'm in Paris in my apartment, yes.
지금 아침 시간으로 제가 알고 있는데 이렇게 이른 아침부터 저희와 함께 시간 보내주셔가지고 너무 감사드리고요. 그리고 코로나 끝나면 꼭 한국에 오셔서 저희 또 직접 만났으면 좋겠습니다. 약속.
I would love that, and merci à vous, comme on dit en français, et oui. Bonne soirée au Corée, which is just good evening to you in Korea. And yes, and good afternoon to you from Paris. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. 감사합니다.